government. We're seeing chaos, crime, and destruction across this country, and we have a series of crises in this country. Housing is a crisis. First time in many generations do we have housing, which should be a fundamental right in Canada, unattainable for so many. When we talk about poverty levels and the ability to have food, nutritious food, and food in the house. Many people right now, Canadians, talk about the inability to go to the grocery store and to buy the food they need. They're buying less food right now. And when we talk about a drug problem across Canada, it's a drug problem that, yes, we're debating, and it is very stark in BC, and there's been mention of Alberta. Madam Speaker, I come from Belleville, Ontario. And Belleville, Ontario is also in a rural town about 2 hours east of Toronto and 2.5 hours west of Montreal that's been hit hard by the drug problem that is affecting all of Canada. You know, Belleville has, right now, the Belleville Sens, the AHL team, the farm team of the Ottawa Senators, who've done what Toronto couldn't do this year, and certainly what Ottawa couldn't do even to get the playoffs. They're in their second round of the playoffs in the AHL, and they're doing well. They're playing the Cleveland Monsters. Hear, hear. We have Procter & Gamble in Belleville, Kellogg's, and for everyone who's a cheesy fan, we have Hawkins Cheesies, and we have some in our office, and they don't last very long. They go well with pinball. You know, I was born in Belleville. So was Avril Lavigne. So was Bobby Hall. We're very proud of that city and all the accomplishments from it. One of the prime ministers, Sir Mackenzie Bowell, the accidental prime minister, was from Belleville, Ontario. But Madam Speaker, Belleville has been rocked by overdoses in February. 13 overdoses in only hours, 2 hours. 23 overdoses in just over 24 hours, 90 overdoses in 1 week, and 240 overdoses in 11 weeks, or 3.5 overdoses a day. In this town, we had the mayor, the former Liberal member for Bay of Quinte, who declared an emergency for Belleville. We have drug addiction, mental health, and homelessness. And the thing about Belleville, Ontario, as much as we have good health care and a great hospital, we have 0 treatment beds. We have 0 detox beds. And when it comes to mental health and addiction, we have a waiting list that's over 500 people long. The emergency crisis was called because rural Ontario, Belleville, Ontario, which is much like a lot of other rural cities across Canada, are finding it too hard to deal with this crisis, which is becoming far too common in all of Canada. You know, when we look at the resources that we need in this country, and I'll give full credit to the community and what they do in our region. When we look at homelessness and poverty and how they affect mental health and then drug use, they're all related. And when we don't take care of the top layers, they're affecting the bottom layers. Madam Speaker, to not have a detox bed or facility, and the only ones we have are an hour east in Kingston, Ontario, for men or women, and then we have another one an hour west of us. When we look at hospital beds are full because when we've had overdose and mental health crises, they're filling up all available beds in all hospitals. I had a councillor in our region who couldn't even go to Belleville. He had to go down to Picton, and almost 40 minutes away, because they're filled and they're to the brim. When we look at paramedics, they feel helpless when in 1 week they have responded to 90 overdose deaths, and the burnout that they feel when the resources are depleted. And when we talk to our police, the fact that they are the first responders of mental health. We have a great mental health detachment of our police called Impact. Impact is medical health first responders, and they feel depleted and helpless as they pick up people who are, of course, need help, bring them to the hospital. There's nowhere else to put them, and they go back on the street, and the cycle goes around again. But most importantly, Madam Speaker, when we look at what we need to fix this crisis, besides detox and beds, it goes down to the fact that we have illicit drugs and drug dealers who are allowed to roam free and are putting these drugs on the street. Our police chief has been very vocal about this. Mike Callahan, who just retired, and Chris Berry, who's in this right now. Police, and I make a habit every year to go on a ride-along with our local police. And that ride-along, you talk to the officers, the first responders, those heroes who are dealing with the crisis, the mental health professionals, and this is what they tell me. They know who the drug dealers are. They know where the drugs are coming in. There's 4 sources in the town that bring them in from Toronto down the 401. They pick up these drug dealers and they're out on bail the very same day. The next morning, they'll pick up another drug dealer, and again, it's the same process. Police will call themselves recyclers because, in effect, they pick up people, they're back on the street, and around we go. Madam Speaker, this affects a very small community, but it also affects Canada. But when we look at this and what's happening across all of our nation, it's not just something happening in BC or in Alberta. It's happening in small communities and rural communities like Belleville and Moncton. It's happening in Peterborough, and it's happening in Kenora. It's happening in Thunder Bay. It's happening in Kingston. At the end of the day, Madam Speaker, we have failed, and this government has failed to take care of this drug problem, and it's affecting not only every family in this country, it's affecting all of our communities and all of this country that we call home and that we love. And it's squarely put onto this government on how it's handling this. The fact that we are not taking care of these crises, these homelessness, the housing, ensuring that we look at mental health and addiction, our healthcare crisis as a whole, and of course then the fact that we can't even get drug dealers off the street. And when we look at this, how it affects small town Belleville, Ontario, then we look at, again, the ideology of about how we're approaching this problem and how we're going to solve it. And it comes down to one thing, Madam Speaker. Drugs are bad. I remember in the 80s and growing up as a teenager, and we'd see commercials on TV. And you'd see one commercial that would say, "This is your brain, and this is your brain on drugs." You know the commercials we see right now, Madam Speaker? Do drugs with a friend. I went on a tour with our critic, a member from Kamloops, Thompson Caribou. We went to a maximum security prison last weekend, and it was in Millhaven by Kingston. Maximum security, where some of the most ruthless monsters that we have in society are put away and serving their time behind bars. Madam Speaker, 3 of the criminals, when we were in there and touring the facility, were high on drugs. High on drugs, in maximum security in their cells. I went with the officer because I couldn't believe it, and we walked in to the cell block, and we're having a conversation face to face with a criminal whose eyes were like this, and they're locked on drugs. And they're getting these drugs because drones are flying in, they're dropping them in the yard, and they're finding the ways to get in. Drug use is far too easy in this country. We're not treating it as what we should, which is going to be something that is lethal to Canadians, to our children, and something that should be outlawed in terms of dealing it, getting access to it, but then treating the ones that are addicted to it with compassion and humanity and making sure we're getting them treatment and detox. This motion, Madam Speaker, tackles 2 things. It ensures, number 1, that common sense Conservatives will ban hard drugs, stop taxpayer-funded drugs, and put the money into detox and recovery. And for all the arguments we've heard today that says, well, this isn't compassionate and this isn't care, this is exactly what these people need. They need to be treated to the fact that everything that they have in terms of an addiction or mental health is treatable. The fact that these municipalities, the paramedics, the police, the community groups who are looking after these individuals have no resources. They're at a loss. The fact that the people who fall into disarray don't have housing. They don't have the pharmaceutical care, and yes, they are being treated like consumers by the pharmaceutical companies who are putting these drugs on the street. Madam Speaker, this bill, this motion, does one thing and 2 things only. 2 things only. It ensures that we look at drugs as bad. We treat those drugs as substances that should be banned and taken off the street. We ensure that we put the drug dealers and those putting them on the street behind bars, and we ensure that those people that are addicted, need mental health support, get the support they need in terms of detox, recovery, most important, Madam Speaker, affordable housing that gets them off the street, and then, of course, looking to the fact that we help people bring our loved ones home drug-free and help Canadians for once. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de la Pointe.
The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, There was a peculiar incident that has occurred, and we find it concerning. The leader of the Conservative Party, when we asked him questions, asking what the difference is between decriminalization and deviation, he said it's just the same thing. It's just word games. But words and semantics are important. Exaggeration takes a bit too much space in this debate. I would like to know if my colleague supports his leader when his leader says that there is absolutely no difference between these two terms.
L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Bay of Quinte.
Speaking, merci beaucoup pour my... no, I stand by our leader when we talk about we're going to ban hard drugs. When we talk about deviation, that means that when pharmaceutical companies are giving a prescribed opioid to a consumer, deviation means that that drug is finding its way into the market. Yeah, that's happening. But, you know, when we talk about decriminalization, well, that's exactly what's happened in Vancouver and what the Toronto mayor wants to do, which is to allow hard drugs on the street. We're against all of that, Madam Speaker. We want drugs off of the street. We want treatment and recovery to Canadians. Semantics matter in the fact that we're the only party that I'm hearing say in the House today that we want to ban hard drugs and then focus all of that money on detox and recovery. They're the only party saying it, Madam Speaker. That's semantics.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I listened to the member's speech and has taken a very complex problem and narrowed it down to very simple slogans, as I'd expect. I have a simple question. I'd like to know how many people with addictions in this opioid crisis has he spoken to, and what has he learned from their experience?
The Honourable for Bay of Quinte.
Well, Madam Speaker, if the member listened to my speech, I've spoken to those individuals. I've talked to hundreds of them, but also, most importantly, the people in the front lines. The police, the mental health responders, those that are running the community groups. We have a group called Bridge Street United Church who is actually in the middle of this opioid epidemic and the overdose situation, who watched 7 people in line collapse from drug use. You know the bigger thing that's happening when we look at what's happening with drugs, because when we give criminals an inch, they take a mile, and what's happened is now they're lacing drugs with horse tranquilizer. So when I'm talking to those individuals in the front lines, they're saying the drugs are getting worse. And all we're saying, Madam Speaker, it's let's give a mile to the people suffering from it, from the first line responders, and let's give it only an inch to the criminals. That's not slogans, Madam Speaker, that's just common sense.
Questions and comments? The Honourable for Nunavut.
When I read the motion, I don't read it the same way that the member just read it, because what I'm seeing from this motion is that the Conservatives are asking the Prime Minister not to listen to the City of Toronto. They're asking the Prime Minister not to listen to the City of Montreal, and they are asking provinces, territories, and municipalities who are asking for help not to be heard. And I find this quite distressing and contradictory to what he's just been sharing. And I wonder if he read his own motion from his party to see that actually they're not encouraging municipalities, provinces, territories to work together to make sure that those people that need the care get the care that they deserve.
The Honourable Member Bay of Quinte.
Well, Madam Speaker, thank you for the question, and the member from Nunavut. This started from asking the government to listen to the province of BC. And when we've been adamant on our ask, which is to ban hard drugs, we're just reacting, and this motion is reacting to statements made by the City of Toronto's mayor and from the City of Montreal, who are asking to make hard drugs legal. And what we're asking for is to listen to the provinces, and the Ontario province has asked to ensure that those hard drugs are illegal. Haven't heard of Quebec or anyone else, but at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, we're listening to Canadians, but like I said, Canadians who are frontline and those suffering in small towns across this whole country. Thank you.
Resuming debate.